Good evening and welcome to our boot camp for online retailers. We're going to be talking about technical SEO tonight. Glad you could join us. Let me just start out quickly with who are we? I am Brad Court, president of Web to Market, and we build, host, do digital marketing for e-commerce sites. And specifically, we work with Magento, Shopify, and Able Commerce platforms. I'll talk about a lot of subjects tonight that are really relevant to all of them and in general to almost any e-commerce shopping platform. Some things will be specific to platforms, and I'll try to call those out, but everything you see this evening should be generally useful for you to know. Tonight, we will be going through about a dozen items, and there will be more. I'll talk about what we'll do in the next session as we wrap things up, but there are a lot of things that we can learn. And actually, as I was going through the list and building this out and thinking about what I had put in the list afterwards, I realized that there's even more that we can discuss. So always a lot to learn. Things are always changing. New opportunities to promote your business open up regularly. And but here's a good dozen things to start with, and we'll go through these. I will spend perhaps 4 or 5 minutes on them each. We'll see how that works out in terms of time. And then we'll try to keep moving as well, so we're not staying on any topic too long. So let's start out with SSL and HTTPS. SSL stands for Secure Socket Layers, and HTTPS is the Secure Hypertransport Protocol. The purpose of having an SSL certificate and using that protocol is to ensure that all content is secure. And these days, Google will punish your site if your content is not secure. So it's important that all the content in your site is secure. And of course, it's just important that it's secure so that any information transmitted by the customer is secure as well. But for SEO, we want to make sure that all the content is secure. There's a couple of places that potentially, or most commonly, content can be insecure. One is that content in your site might be old and may have some old HTTP links, and you might have inherited those from a previous version of your site, or somebody might have added an image into your site and hard-coded it with HTTP instead of HTTPS, and that'll cause Google to flag that both for SEO and also for just as people browse it, it'll warn people that content is insecure. Another place that can come from potentially is a third-party service, a JavaScript that you're linking to, and they have a link in there or content that uses HTTP instead of HTTPS. That's certainly not going to be common if your site was built or updated in the last couple of years. But if you've got an older site, that's a potential problem. Easily fixed by replacing it with a modern or current third-party set of links. If you would like to figure out if your site has any old or insecure links, without going through your site page by page, you can use this free website check at jitbit.com. Just head over there and fill in the form, submit it, and they'll run your site through. And as long as your site doesn't have too many pages, they'll do it for free. I will, by the way, make a copy of this presentation available as well, so you can download it and follow any links that I have in the presentation. Moving on, mobile friendliness. Nowadays, most traffic on the web, the internet, is being accessed by mobile devices, and that can be tablets or it can be cell phones. Still, a lot of people don't have, a lot of merchants still are out there that have non-mobile friendly sites, and that's obviously a problem for visitors themselves because they're having a less than optimal experience. They're doing a lot of panning and zooming, and it can be really difficult to just get through that checkout process. So, I mean, you should do it for the user, but Google sees that, and they want to make sure that we as developers and merchants are taking care of our visitors, and so they've moved to mobile first indexing. So they're uh, they're not being too difficult about how mobile friendly it is. They're not trying to do that in a very sophisticated way, it seems. As long as you've got a pretty good mobile friendly, as long as your site's decently mobile friendly, they're going to index it. But you have to remember they're indexing the mobile version of your site, not the desktop. And let me talk about that a second. So there's a couple of ways we can get mobile, a couple of approaches to having mobile friendly sites. One is responsive, the other is adaptive. And the difference is that adaptive is there is actually a separate interface for each, for it might just be one mobile interface, or it might be a separate interface for a cell phone, a separate interface for a tablet, and a separate interface for a desktop. Responsive is a little bit different in that responsive, there's actually one design, but it has some layout controls that display the elements of that page differently, depending on whether it's a tablet or a cell phone or a TV or a desktop, and the size of it. So there's small differences. If you really want to dig into it, you can always Google that. Generally, people are going responsive these days, but you definitely want to have some kind of mobile interface. If you want to see what Google thinks of your website and how mobile friendly it is, you can use their Search Console. Here's a link. You can go to visit that. If you don't have a Search Console account set up, you definitely want to do that. We'll look at that as the last item in this presentation and explore that just a little bit. There's a ton there, so we'll probably pick that up in round 2. But definitely want to have a mobile friendly site. So optimizing robots.txt. Robots.txt is a file in the root, usually in the root directory of your site, that tells search engines which pages to index. The robots.txt, depending on your platform, it can be managed or not managed. And what I mean by that is, like, Shopify generates a robots.txt file automatically, and you have no control of it. There's just one file. If you have too many products, it doesn't care. It just generates one file. Other platforms are more sophisticated and will let you control where that's placed and some other details. For example, we've got this example down on the bottom here showing what might be in a Magento site. And if you look through the rows, you'll see that there's a disallow, and it's specifically telling the search engines, don't look in these folders. Now, the reason for that is that search engines will index, well, go through your site and look at your pages, but there's a limited number of pages that it will put in its primary index. And as a result, you don't want it indexing pages that, customers aren't going to see, or you don't want them to see. For example, an admin, you just don't want, there's no reason to have that in Google, so you would disallow that. And that way, Google and others are focusing on putting valuable pages that you want your customers to find in their primary index. Optimizing the URL structure. So here we in the top, we have an example of a pretty complicated URL structure. These days, shopping cart platforms have gotten a little more sophisticated, so they do a better job of following the rules I'm going to discuss. But if you've got an older shopping cart, or you've gotten made your coding a little complicated, you can easily violate some of these rules. And some shopping carts, honestly, don't follow these rules perfectly either. But here's the ideal. One is you want your page's URL to be relevant. So your URL should talk about the product or the category, for example, that's in there. You don't want your URL to say books when the product, your page you're on, is for t-shirts. That will confuse Google. Customers may not pay any attention to that, but Google is looking at the URL to help understand what the contents of the page is. So it needs to be relevant. You want to follow a standard URL structure. In other words, you want to be consistent about what your URL contains. If it contains a path, as we see here, you want that to be a consistent format. And the query string, well, I would avoid query strings, but the path or the file name, you want that to be a consistent format, just to keep it easy, make it easy for Google to follow. Keep it short and simple. Shorter URLs are preferred by Google, and you know, it has to do with also the next point, which is focusing on your primary keyword. So every page has a subject in Google's mind, and so there should be a primary keyword for that page, and you want to include. So if it's about a book about cars, you would want it to be something like car book or something like that. Use hyphens to separate words. Long debate about hyphens or underscores, and generally it's hyphens. It's a little easier, it seems, for Google to understand. And then remove stop words. So there are words that that just are not productive. Remove superfluous words like and, or, etc., and just focus on those primary keywords. Moving on to improve your category navigation structure. Now, this is almost more of as much an art as it is a science, because there's such a wide range of content in websites. Some websites have, you might have, for example, might have 10 products in it, whereas other websites might have millions of products in it. So obviously your navigation structure is going to be different. But you really want your user structure to be thought out, not random, because you want to have a better search experience, a better customer experience as they navigate through your site, and it needs to work well for search engines as well. And third, it provides a good navigation structure will provide your site with good site links for things like Google Ads, to be able to link to your site and get to helpful places for people searching. So 4 steps to think about here. One is to plan your hierarchy to be logical. Now, you might think that obviously I want to be logical, but if you take a few minutes and look around at navigation structures on a lot of e-commerce sites, especially larger e-commerce sites, you'll find that they look to be very random. And a lot of that is because they've simply evolved that way over time. Somebody started out with a logical structure, and then people just kept changing and tweaking and adding and throwing stuff on there. And pretty soon you have, some places where you click 6 times to get to where you want, and other times on the same site, you click 1 time. But you want to think about your structure, whether you're building a new site or you've got a site, and maybe make it a little more logical. Second is you want to use HTML or CSS for your navigation structure. No JavaScript, no Flash, no Ajax. The primary reason for that is that search engines don't read JavaScript, Flash, or Ajax very well. So they're not going to be able to follow your navigation if you've used those technologies. And obviously you want Google to be able to find its way through your site. So don't block it with a technology it can't read. Third, use common search terms for category names. naming your categories well to match what people are searching on, keywords and phrases that people are searching on, is important, because people usually are searching for a topic, and of course categories are kind of topics, and rather than name them the way that you might refer to them or an industry insider, it's good to look in Google and in the keyword finder and Google Ads, for example, and identify what phrases are popular when people are searching for your product or that category specifically, and include in the name that phrase that people are searching on commonly. That way, when obviously when people search Google, it's more likely to match up with what people are searching for than some phrase that's not exactly the same. And finally, this is again where it's kind of more an art than science. You want to have as few clicks as possible to get to the product. At the same time, 7 to 10 top category, 7 to 10 top level categories is usually best. So, if you've got a lot of products, you're going to end up probably with more top level categories. But, if you start to have 15, 20 top level categories, it gets hard for people to read through that. People are lazy. 7, 8, 9, 10, they can quickly scan through. Then, next level, 7, 8, 9, 10 selections max, and so forth, down to the product. Here's where we get to be pretty geeky. The structured markup data, or schema markup, is coding that's not visible to somebody looking at the web page, but it's in the code. And this is not for people to read; it's specifically for bots to read. So I've got an example on the bottom here. If you look at towards the bottom, you've got a listing for an Apple iPad. And you can see in the listing that it specifically calls out the rating and a price range. And if you've got something like this, you do a search for Apple iPads, and you see a rating, and you see that price in there, and that listing and that result. It's obviously going to catch your eye a little bit more. It's going to give you a little more information than other people's page listings are, and so these are good things. Folks see those, and they're going to be more likely to click through on this Best Buy ad than maybe somebody who has a less informative product search result on Google. Now, if you look below that, you're going to see some code, and it doesn't match exactly the Best Buy ad, but it's pretty close. So you're going to see, in this case, we're going to show a SKU, we're going to show the reviews, the ratings, and the number of reviews, and you can see the tags for that. So that's an example of structured data and how it appears in the code, and then you can see, as we said, how it might look in a search result. You can get this structured data. It depends on how you get this structured data. Depends on the platform you're using. If you're using Shopify, for example, you can either do it with an app or some custom code. If you're using Magento, for example, there's extensions that will do this. And there are a wide variety of pieces of data that can be outputted using structured data. Set it up once. The extensions / apps are fairly expensive. Get them in place, and it's done. And you're going to get some better output across the different Google shopping platforms, for example, shopping and maps and the organic results and so forth. So good stuff to do. Setting up canonical URLs. So a canonical URL refers to, and I'm going to simplify this a little bit, but it tells search engines what page to use when there's duplicate content. So you're probably thinking to yourself, how can I get duplicate content in my site? Well, an example is that you've got a product that shows up in 2 categories in your site, and the URL is slightly different. In that case, and I should stop and say, Google does not like duplicate content. If it looks at your site and thinks you have a lot of duplicate content, it dislikes that. And if you have enough of it, Google will really dislike your site, and potentially you could end up on a blacklist. And we've even had we didn't build the site, but we had somebody come to us with a Magento site that had disappeared from Google, and the reason was that they had intentionally spammed Google with all sorts of pages that had similar content, and so we had to assist them getting out of that blacklist. But even if you're not trying, you can end up with duplicate content. So you want to have a canonical tag in. If you have a modern platform, it probably manages the example that I mentioned of having two pages for the same product. It should handle that itself. But if you're creating your own custom platform or customizing it, you will want to mark one of those pages as being canonical in some manner. By the way, if you want to see if your site has duplicate content in it, I've got a link here, and you just follow it. It'll run through your site, look for duplicate content, and give you warnings about that. And if you do have duplicate content, you may even want to just consider cleaning up some of that. Creating custom 404 error pages. So a 404 error page is a page that comes up when a page does not exist, or a URL calls for a page that does not exist. And that can happen a variety of ways. For example, you upgraded your site and switched to a new platform, and the URL structure changed. Or maybe you just had a product that you stopped carrying, and it's inactive, and so now it generates a 404 error when somebody visits that. You want to handle that well for both customers and for search engines. Google will think or potentially think it. So one way you can handle that, which isn't great, is to redirect your missing pages, any visits to missing pages, to the home page. And if you do that, Google can be confused and think that your home page is actually an error page. And obviously your home page is very important. So we don't want to be confusing Google about that and have your home page drop out and lose some rank because of that. Customers can be confused because they obviously went to a page with a purpose in mind, and now something odd happened. They're on the home page. How do I find this product? A really good way to handle it, and it's a simple thing to do, it's maybe an hour or two of work, is to create a custom 404 page. I got an example here. Who doesn't love a dog in underwear? But in this case, it's cute, and then they've simply listed some ways to find top-level categories, and people can then head off. You've got the search box on the top, but it just makes for a clean user experience, and the search engines don't get confused. Meta titles and meta descriptions. All right, so again, code and that appears in the obviously it appears in the code, but isn't visible to the visitor to the website, but it is visible to search engines. And where this comes into play in a number of places. So the meta title is what shows up at the very top of your page in your blue bar at the top that tells you the name of the page. And it has a number of functions. One is that when you bookmark a page, that's what the title is, what's going to show up as the name of that page in the bookmark. It's going to show up in the title bar, as we talked about, and it's going to show up in organic search results. If you look down here, we see the title tag for Malaysia Airlines MH370. That's the title, where the title tag shows up. It is a ranking factor as well. So you want, good keywords to fit in there, and you want it to make sense. The meta description is basically the text, the description that describes the content of the page. Search engines don't care about this. They used to, they do not now. So write it for humans. You want to have a good description of what's on that page, why they should go there, and you want to have a call to action. So if you've got a product, you might want to say, I don't know, just for example, click here to buy today, or something like that. Just some kind of call to act. And lastly, we have the Search Console. And mentioned we'd get to this. Very important tool to see how Google is viewing your site, seeing what kind of problems it's having, how much traffic you're getting, what keywords people are using to get to your site, error messages, what it thinks about mobile usability, and much more. So let's take a quick look at that. And here we go. So here's an example site, Aspiration Hosting, highly recommended for as a partner of ours. Anyway, so here we are in the overview. We can see performance. We can see people clicking through over time. We can drill into that and do comparisons with previous years, different ranges of time. Middle section here, we have coverage, how many valid pages it's finding, how many pages with errors, and some other smaller items here. Speed, which is important to Google. Mobile usability, important. Logos, these are brands it's identifying on the site. Reviews, site links. So it just gives you a high-level overview. On the left navigation bar, we can we have URL inspection. You see it pop up on the top. We can have put a specific URL in it and test it out and see what errors it finds, or if it's, for example, is it able to index it? Is it being blocked by Robots.txt, etc. Coverage, pages valid, pages excluded. We can drill in and see why they're excluded. We won't go into a lot of detail there now, but a lot of legitimate reasons that, it probably is fine to have 260 pages excluded. Your site maps, here you submit your site maps and you can make sure that they're actually being indexed. You can tell Google to remove links to your site or content from your site. And again, you don't want Google to index good content. You don't want to fill it primary index with junk. Speed we mentioned briefly. We talked about mobile usability. Mobile usability. Logos we talked about ever so briefly. Review snippets, site links, security, any kind of viruses on your site, any kind of manual actions where you're being blacklisted for example, duplicate content. A lot of good tools here to make sure that Google is indexing your site and not running into problems, and you're doing the right things to build traffic to your site. All right, we'll cover that in a little more detail the next time we get together. So there are, as I mentioned, a lot of things that we can continue to cover. Here are some of them that is kind of on the docket for the next presentation. I know there's more I want to popped into my mind to talk about Google Shopping, which they now have a free listing. They just announced that a couple of days ago. Kind of coming full circle on that. You go back 10 years, they promised they'd never charge for listings. And yet, I guess when the quarterly profits weren't, enough billions, they decided to start charging for that. But now they have a free listing again. So anyway, lots of things to talk about next time. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. If you have questions or comments or want some help with something specifically, absolutely get in touch with me. I will, I will flash up on the screen my contact info, and feel free to get in touch with me and let us know if we can help you in any way. Thank you for your time. Good night.